My name is Igor Vainshtein. I am a startup addict who was born in USSR, moved to Australia, then to USA, to Dallas, Texas. I've started over 20 businesses, failed at most, succeeded in some, written two books, developed an entrepreneur board game called Entrepreneuropoly. And today I'm going to share with you the fun journey that comes from this wild ride called life and entrepreneurship.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and today we've got a guest whose entrepreneurial journey reads like an epic adventure. Now, Igor, how are you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited because, I've seen your work and I just can't wait to share you with our world here on the Online Prosperity Show. Now, for those that are watching, thank you so much for tuning into the Online Prosperity Show. Don't forget to subscribe because you won't get any more epic content like this anywhere else. Now, if you're still with us, I want you to imagine having to move from the USSR to Australia at a tender age of 10, and then going on to launch your first business by age 17, and then eventually revolutionizing the golf industry. That's not exactly a typical career path, but well, that's precisely the story that our next guest, Igor, undertook. So Igor is the founder of 24/7 Golf, a company that made high-quality golf simulators accessible to golf enthusiasts everywhere. But he actually didn't stop there. He went on to create Golf Track app, which brought the golf course right into your pocket. Talk about innovation and things of that nature. So his ventures have not only transformed how we experience golf, but also exemplify the power of resilience and innovation. And in today's episode, we're going to dive into this remarkable story from his early days as a young immigrant to now becoming this serial entrepreneur. And we're going to explore the highs and the lows and also the lessons learned along the way. Now, Igor, I could go on and on. I could even end up speaking Russian, but that defeats the whole purpose of having you on the show today. Tell us a little bit about the journey, the move from the USSR to Australia. If you,
oh man, it's a. I do remember. It seems like it was so long ago. It was long ago, but I tell people who have never moved countries. For me, anyway, the first 10 years are almost like a movie that I've half or more than half forgotten because a lot of it's like this amnesia. Like the first 10 years of my life, I just have these snippets, and there's some pretty interesting snippets in there. Growing up, and there's a story I tell where I went to the sleepaway camp, and that was like technically that was my first ever business. I was like 6 years old, going to the sleepaway camp to Sevastopol in Ukraine. It's hot on the beach. I hate at that point. I hate the beach. Having grown up in Australia, love the beach now, but back then I hated the beach. And then I had this idea, and I don't know where this idea came from, right? Like it's the mystery of the universe, right? Where things like that come from, especially to a 6-year-old. But I went, and the second day was really hot, and there was no water, on the beach. There's no water fountains. There's no, filters or whatever. So I brought water from this, the dorm where we were staying. I filled up my backpack full of water, and I ended up selling that whole backpack of water on the beach at 6 years old. And my parents got into a lot of trouble when I got back to my hometown because they were apparently raising a capitalist pig, and they were super proud and knew that we had to get out of USSR, obviously. And a few years later, we ended up moving to Australia. That was a difficult journey in itself. But I very clearly remember landing in Australia, in Melbourne, Australia. It was about 6 a.m. on May 10th, 1991. And just seeing sort of this new country completely differently. I was pretty wired because in former Soviet Union there was no Coca-Cola, right? So on the flight over, we flew via I think it was via Kazakhstan and then India and then Singapore. And then Singapore was switched over for, because we're flying Aeroflot. Before then, Singapore was switched over to Qantas, and they had, unlimited drinks on the plane. And so, if my memory serves me correctly, on the flight from Singapore to Melbourne, I had 33 cans of Coke. So you can imagine how wide a 10-year-old was after that. So it was definitely an experience. But that was the journey of moving to Australia. And we started, we landed in Australia on that May 10th, and we had $200. We had a $100 note and two $50 notes. And, what is it, 3 or 4 suitcases. And that's really it. You're going to start life from scratch. And, my parents were late 30s at that time. We didn't, this is my second language, didn't speak English. And you start again. And that's pretty, it's vivid and yet seems like watching like that you've seen a movie by someone else. It's a weird feeling, hard to describe. I don't know if you've had a similar experience.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, growing up in a whole different place and country, and then, having to move over to another country where you have to learn the customs, the language, the way of life, and everything else. And also, you did mention something really, important there, because you're coming from a different political environment, which did not allow capitalism yet.
Not yet.
First thing that you did was try and sell water to some of the kids. Where was the influence coming from? Do you know?
I don't really know. It's a funny one. I think this goes back to a question I'm sure you've spoken a lot about, not only with your guests, but just generally. It's a common question. Is this something you're born with, or, is it nature versus nurture? And I really think it's a combination of the two. And I think I was definitely born with something very entrepreneurial. There's some genetic, mutation that just makes your brain work in a particular way. And, I have kids now. My son just turned 10 yesterday, and my daughter's 6, and I can already see the way they think, the way they talk. And yes, it's probably influenced by being around me and being around my wife was in sales, very entrepreneurial. And so I think you have to be born with something different, just a little bit different. But I feel like if you were born with that, like, you kind of know deep down, you really know. And then it's really a question of, well, how can it be nurtured? And obviously being born in, the wrong country. And I'm sure you've heard the statistic, right? There's the number one factor to your life success, like across the entire world, is the number one factor is simply where you were born.
Yeah.
Right. And just because you're born in the wrong country doesn't mean that's where you're going to end up, and obviously, I was very lucky that my parents saw that they needed to find a way out, and they did, and that's amazing. But my kids are born in an amazing place, right? And so they have a lot more opportunity, but there's also, everything's a double-edged sword. So much of entrepreneurial success is built by immigrants because they come from nothing and they have nothing to lose. And so their attitude to success and to working hard is very different to people who kind of, like my kids, like, I have to raise them to want this, success and have the drive, that I have. That's what I'm trying, but without the influence of having nothing. And that friend of mine said an amazing phrase that I actually want to mount it on the wall. I keep talking about mounting it on the wall, but still haven't done it. It's on my to-do list, which is, you can't fake poverty. And I love that, because it's truly, that really sums it up. Like, you cannot raise your kids with this fake, being poor fakely, right? And, that we had when we came to Australia, for example. Some of my friends are also immigrants, and so you have to find different methods. And I think that's an interesting thing. Like I said, it's if you grow up in comfort, that can create complacency, which is just as dangerous as other things in terms of being able to achieve things in life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I love that. And I think that statement really resonates. You can't fake poverty. Igor, you can imagine me trying to tell my kids, during breakfast, and I'm like, hey guys, finish your breakfast. There's hungry kids in Africa. And the older one is cheeky, and she turns around and she says, you're from Africa. You're not hungry. And
Exactly
Automatically.
right. Exactly. Listen, I used to
Automatically.
hear the whole hungry kids in Africa thing even when I was back in USSR. Like, it's just a common thing, right? You had to, yeah, I totally get that.
Absolutely. Now, you did mention that, when your parents sort of took wind of the kind of person that you were, it somehow made the move for them easy. What were your parents doing that made it easy for them to uproot themselves and think they could find themselves somewhere else?
Well, I mean, there's this kind of factors wasn't easy, and the move definitely was extremely difficult. But in some ways, the decision to stay would have been, pretty horrible. I mean, the USSR was going through a massive change, right? And it was obvious that it was going to go into extreme poverty, especially where we're from. And the state that I was born in, called Moldova. I mean, it's a separate country now. It's basically bankrupt. It's almost a failed state. It's like a little European, town where I was born, but it's not really a thriving economy. And and so my parents could see that, which they had the foresight to, so which I appreciate. There was also the fact that I'm the only child, so they were thinking about me, and more than about themselves almost. And being a parent now, I totally get that and appreciate that a lot more, being a dad now. But the other thing is, and I guess this is a relevant, topic these days. There's anti-Semitism was extremely, widespread in USSR at that time, as it has been for 100 years. But and that was another factor that they knew that we would be under prosecution from all my life if we stayed, just like they were growing up in that state. So there was all these factors that in the end, if you look at it, it's like the decision's easy. It's the execution that's hard, and I guess that's kind of an interesting simile to business, to entrepreneurship. It can be the decision to start your own business can be very, very easy. The execution is where the real magic happens or blows up, as I have experienced many times.
Absolutely. Now, the 10th of May 1991 is a date that's etched in your memory because you said that
Yeah.
without a doubt, and you were about 10 years old, wired, high on caffeine and Coca-Cola, and just the euphoria of coming into Australia with your parents, pretty rich with $150 and a couple of suitcases. What was your first impression of Australia? I mean, at 10, at least you now know your toys, you now have a language, you now have some sort of a culture. But what was it like when you got immersed into the Australian?
So, I mean, the first there's two kind of memories that jolt from that. The first thing is when we landed, I had all these images of these really fancy cars that we're gonna see in Australia, right? So I was like, so we had a friend of an aunt, of a long lost aunt, whatever, come pick us up from the airport, and we were going through the car park, and I'm seeing all these cool modern, what looked like modern cars, and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to get. And then he had this old early '70s beat up Datsun. It was it was so bad, and I was so disappointed. I'm like, why are we going in this really old car? It looked like one of the Ladas back from the Soviet Union. It was so, I just remember that feeling. It was really, really weird, my first impression. But then on that first day, we walked to a supermarket, and you got to remember that there were no supermarkets in the USSR. So, even if you go to the shop, the shelves are empty. And then we walk in, and there's just rows and rows of food and like chocolates and drinks and whatever you can imagine. And that just blew our mind. And it's funny, you take that for granted, go to Walmart or Costco or, whatever, right? You walk in and there's just, you can drive around a golf cart around this thing. It's so big, right? And you forget that some people have never seen this in their life. And that's another thing that I remember. There's the abundance. And again, double-edged sword, right? So much abundance creates so much obesity, so much, bad habits, so much, sugar addiction, all this stuff, right? It's like when you didn't have sugar, there was no addiction to sugar. It was just nothing, you couldn't get it. I remember when we were like living in USSR, you had to get little coupons, like food coupons to go and because you couldn't buy things. Everything was rationed, and like our family would get like a half a pound of sugar for a month. You had a ticket. You had to go exchange that little docket for a half a kilo of sugar. Oh, sorry, half a pound or a pound or whatever. For the month. It's just funny memories. That you kind of you see things different. Your perspective on things. I think being an immigrant really. I think you see things. Without rose-colored glasses, you see the duality of things. There's a massive benefit to prosperity and all the things, but you also see the downside. Like it's it's a funny thing. I kind of haven't really thought about it as much, recently, but now that we're talking about it, it really, it really highlights for me that duality is actually an interesting perspective that I'm not sure a lot of people have or notice. They just take it for granted. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. So many people haven't left Victoria that I speak to, yet, we've gone, traveled, continents and things of that nature. So that comparison really leaves a lot. See, I'm coming from a place where inflation was literally invented, in Zimbabwe.
Yes. I know. What's the largest domination note now? Is it like 1 million or?
Oh no, you're talking poverty there. We've got billions. They had billions of dollars at some point, but now they've integrated into some sort of gold backed currency, which I think is actually doing well. So I need to check up on that. But it's one of those things where even right now for me, it's so easy for me to spend $100 note or $50 note, just put it away, because that was the start in our currency. Yeah. So that still needs to be cleared off, because I remember going to some park there, and I pulled out $100 note, and my wife is like, "Wait a minute, that wouldn't have changed." And I was like, "Seriously? It's $100." I still need to figure that out. Funny. But you then grew up around this. I mean, obviously in and around the caffeine, which was a highlight, and the sugar in the shops. But at 17, you then went on and launched your first official business. What was it? Just so that we know what you had seen.
Yeah. So I did work experience. I started working when I was about 14. I did 3 months at McDonald's. As a lot of people do. But I worked in networking, so I used to run network cables in the company where my dad worked. So I was a super geek, very tech heavy, and I did work experience. I remember through sort of towards my early days of high school at like the NASA equivalent in Australia called CSIRO. They had these massive computers, and they had this thing called the internet, which back in '96 was very new. And I really got into it. And when I got back, I started talking, a bit of time went past, but when I started talking to people, I would say, "Have you got a website?" And they're like, "What's a website?" And so again, just something, because I was just passionate about it. I loved, I wanted to be part of this internet thing. I started making websites for people and, charging them $100 for a website. And that's how my first business started. I was building websites and then databases, and one of my early jobs was I was like contracting, like basically it was like a little consulting business, I guess. Reflecting back, and one of my clients was a dating agency that needed a website refresh and a database maintenance, and I worked with them to do that, and I built a few websites. That was really the first business. And I remember it was called Off-Planet Operations. I still remember that. I had a little logo of like the Earth, and like an O was like the ring under it, like a shadow. And I came up with that myself, and I was very proud of myself. So that's also etched in my mind.
Absolutely. So you literally started off in the .com sort of era, and we can actually just call you an internet explorer then, because everybody else is just a scroller.
Yep, internet. Yeah, exactly. Internet Explorer. I mean, I was using Netscape 1 back in the day.
Oh, okay.
The very first one.
Yeah. For those at home, do you still remember the internet mating call?
Yep. Yeah. Well, actually, I was using all that before the internet. It was bulletin boards, BBS. Remember, you had to dial in, and this is like trying to explain to my son what a cassette tape is. It's really funny, actually. Right, in my lifetime, we've gone from like so back in the USSR, my dad's a software engineer. So, he started on punch cards. And then, but we had at home like the big tapes, and then there was floppy disks and cassette tapes and all that. And then, there was CDs and DVDs. And then all of a sudden, all that's gone. There's mini disc, and like my son just knows like iPad. It's all in the cloud. Like, why would you have something physical? It's like he doesn't even understand. And it's just really funny that makes me feel old, man. Because like I've seen like 3 or 4 technologies come and go, you know. But anyway,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of your son, he's 10 now.
right.
Is there any reminders or resemblance or something that just puts you back to when
Oh,
you were 10 that you are now seeing in your son right now?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, he's like I keep saying to him that I don't think he's actually my son. I think he's my clone. And he's he loves business. He loves entrepreneurship. I taught both my kids, obviously my wife and I, in sales. So the number one skill we wanted to teach them is, sales, which is, influence. It's anything you do in life is sales. It's the number one skill, I think, in the entire world. And so he has all those things already. It's amazing to watch, and he's just so much faster also than I was when I was 10. He's creating content on Roblox and Fortnite. He's creating skins and he's trying to sell them, and there's just stuff. He's got a YouTube channel. Like, he's doing stuff that blows my mind, and it's an amazing reminder for how amazing little humans can be. It's really
Well,
cool.
absolutely. I mean, they say an apple wouldn't fall that far from the apple
Yeah.
tree because you've been now described as a serial entrepreneur, having developed, I mean, over a dozen multi-million-dollar businesses. And I think maybe because you cheated, you were there when the internet was invented and you obviously saw the things. Now, just walk us through how you then obviously progressed from that 17 up until
Right.
maybe first sort of business that yeah.
So it's funny. Most of my, I've started probably 20 businesses, and like 18 of them failed. Right. So let's just get that out there straight away so that people kind of have a more realistic idea of what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And, I can talk about, the board game I created to kind of reflect that, because that, I think a lot of people, they have a slightly rose-colored view of entrepreneurship, and I want to make sure that everyone knows the real version. That's kind of one of my passions in life, is making sure people know the true story. But basically, after starting the business, and I did that through uni, college, university. So I did a 3 degree. I finished when I was 20, and I was working at a .com, one of the first in Australia. And my parents kind of influenced me there a little bit, and they wanted me to get a high paying consulting job at one of the big software companies. So I ended up getting headhunted by SAP at one point, and I started my career kind of progression, up a ladder, and I was a senior consultant very young age. I think I was 22. But before that, what happened was I read a little book you may have heard of called Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Robert Kiyosaki.
Exactly. And I mean, that changed my life. And in fact, one of my dad's friends gave it to me, whose name is also Igor. As a present, I remember I read that book, and then I read one of his advisor's book called Real Estate Riches by Dolph DeRoos. He's a New Zealand guy, amazing guy as well. And I ended up buying property. I saw the opportunity there to, and I thought, this is really cool. Like, you go and you buy, you renovate, you revalue, pull the equity out, and repeat. And so I went from 20 to 22. I went from 0 to, I think it was something like 14 properties. And that was really kind of my first, I wouldn't call it business, but it was my first fortune that I made. But then I lost everything before my 23rd birthday. I was going through some stuff, and I was going through depression and other things in life, and I wanted to find happiness. And I read a lot of self-help books, and to me, I feel like they led me down a wrong path a little bit, and I ended up quitting my job, my high-paying job, and then it was like a house of cards that fell away, and I lost my property portfolio. And again, like the whole that experience with the self-help books kind of later on down the track led me to writing my own books, and I've got one which is just there, you can see, but I got a second one coming out shortly, which is kind of in the self-help section, because I wanted to be practical about it. To me, a lot of the things I read back then, led me to a path of what I'd call a little bit of delusion, where, things can be easy. That rose-colored version I was telling you about, that's kind of why I have this pet peeve about seeing the real side of, entrepreneurship, real side of self-development. It's not an easy path. It's very rewarding, but I feel like a lot of books made it sound not unrealistic, and so I built this property portfolio. I had this amazing high-paying tech job. I quit my job. I invested into a business because that was supposed to be where I find happiness. It was there were three schmucks in the business. I was the fourth schmuck. I was the biggest schmuck because I funded the whole thing. I ended up losing like my entire property portfolio in 3 months. Like it was, and I was down to nothing. In fact, there's a story where I talk about it. I was down to my last 20 cents. In terms of in my pocket, and I started another business. Almost, through kind of necessity, which ended up growing to a 4.5 million revenue, 22 staff or so, from 23 to 27 in the consulting space, kind of the stuff I was working in. And then I lost everything again, literally overnight, because I gave 40%, not sold. I gave 40% of the business to this couple that used to work for me to kind of deliver, and I would go and sell, and then they ended up screwing me and doing a backdoor contract, and basically fraud. But there's nothing I could have really done, and then I lost everything again. And then I met an amazing mentor. I called her my mom 2.0, Carolyn. She said, "Hey, take the energy, rebuild. There's no point suing them. You lose the money, they'll go bankrupt. There'll be nothing there anyway." So I did, and I rebuilt, and then just as I won $1 million of contracts, GFC hits, global financial crisis, 2008, and I lose everything again. So that yo-yo, that is the entrepreneur experience. I mean, and again, another mentor of mine once said to me, when I was bringing an example of some of these, billion-dollar companies that ever started, on their first go around, and he said, you don't learn much from outliers. And that's really true. It's like you're not going to learn much from people that hit it first time. Usually it's not even their first time. Usually that's even, that's a story, but that's not reality. And that sort of up and down is really just, that's the real version of entrepreneurship. That's really what you got to realize. That's what most roads are like. It's a, overnight success, 10 years in the making or more. Does that make, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for taking us through that journey, because obviously this is the behind the scenes that a lot of people don't get to experience. I mean, people can see the shining lights and the accolades and all those things that come along with entrepreneurship, but it's the things behind the scenes that shape us. But you did mention, you'd read all these books, you were exposed to all these sort of teachings, and I discovered something that you can see behind me. I have a lot of books and I've been doing a lot of reading myself. A lot of books are written so they can just be on the bestseller list. They don't necessarily have the actual answers that people are looking for. And I think that's the reason why so many people just do enough, all right, and just give maybe like a 80-20 sort of ratio towards the good stuff and just stuff that puts them on a bestseller list. I don't know. Maybe you can comment on that, because this is something that's not proven, but I'm starting to think, because everybody wants to be a best-selling Amazon author or things of that nature.
I think that's a good point. I think people do it more for other reasons, right? Whatever those reasons are. It may be for maybe not the best reason, not the right reason. I think most probably are genuine, but also what I've, specifically in the self-help world, what I found is a lot of people, they want to, they go out there, they want to help people, but they've never helped themselves. And so they go straight to teaching without actually ever having done anything. And I think a lot of the books that I read, certainly, again, with 20 years plus experience, life experience after the fact, that's how it seems to me. is
All
that a
right.
lot of people, they want, there's this whole thing where people want to be life coaches, so, but their life is not in order. But I think sometimes it's a lot easier to kind of try to help other people than help yourself. And so, for me, what ended up happening is, I had like one of the books I wrote 15 years ago, and in fact, the board game I wrote 15 years ago, but they were on the shelf all this time, and I didn't feel like I could share it with the world until I was ready. And I was ready when I gone through more life, gone through more failures, but also gone through success. Where I had an exit and sold the company, and expanded internationally, and I've done stuff that I felt that, hey, I've got enough, notches on my belt about what I believe to be success, to kind of get over the imposter syndrome, which I still feel plenty of times, but to get over it enough to say, hey, you know what, I think I do have something valuable to share with the world. And it's unique because I take a different perspective to it, having learned all these lessons, having, read all these books that didn't give me what I needed at the time. And what I'm hoping is that, there's things I share with the world do give someone, even if it's one person, but it gives them the realistic, practical something that allows them to, change their world. Then I feel like I've succeeded with that. And at this point also, once you get to a certain point in life, it's not, you're not doing it for, financial gain or reputational gain or whatever. You're doing it for yourself. And I think when it's at that stage, you probably have more, a more, for lack of a better word, noble way of sharing something, which is really more like more selfless way of sharing it, if that makes sense.
Mm. But Igor, when you lost the properties and you obviously recovered from that, you could have just let it all go. You could have just stopped, but you kept going. Why is that?
Well, that's a really good question. I've reflected on that many times as the years have gone, and especially when you're going through your hardest moments. What keeps you going? And I also had, I talk about this interesting double-edged sword again, where I had a very successful, I made a successful career in the tech world. I could have had a really high-paying tech job, CTO. I had CTO jobs. I could have kept going, whatever. And you think like, why can't I just like switch off that part of my brain that just wants to build things and go get a job and, work 9 to 5 or whatever the equivalent is, take a paycheck and just be happy. And I think this is where nurture versus nature thing comes in. It's like, it's just not who I am. And I couldn't imagine giving up on all the things that I dreamt about, building and changing the world and changing an industry or many industries and whatever. And so to me, giving up would have been, I called it like emotional suicide, right? Where you're alive, but your emotions are dead. Like you just you don't feel the world anymore. You don't see color anymore. I don't know, something like that. And to me, that was, almost, I feared that more than death. Because it's like you'd have to endure it for God knows how many years, especially if you plan on living a long time, right? That's many, many, many years of misery. And I was like, yeah, I don't think I can do that. And so, the pain of rebuilding and, I don't know, eating some humble pie or whatever was less than the pain or my imagined pain of spending the next 50, 60, 70 years in, mediocrity and misery. And so that's what kept me going.
Absolutely. And I really like how you explain that, because people get to live a very long time these days because of medical advancements and things like that. I read somewhere that most people die at 25, but they only just get buried at 99 years old.
Oh God, I love that. That's a really interesting point. I love that phrase.
Because pretty much after that, that's when all the things that could happen to them, and they just lose the will to keep.
It's when your dreams die, right? It's when your dreams are beaten out of you.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
Absolutely. But there's one thing that you also did. Obviously, you didn't shy away from, getting up and doing it all again. But this time around, you didn't do it alone. You introduced a new character, Caroline, Mom 2.0. Tell me, how important is it to have support and just to have somebody who believes in you while you're going about, growing an enterprise like you have.
Well, I think, no one, if anyone tells you that they built it themselves, I think they're either narcissistic or lying. Because you need people around you. You must have people around you. And, because you can only, there's only so much time in the day, there's only so much energy you have. And so you need to build the right teams around you, not just in terms of people that work for you, but people that can support you, people that can keep you honest. So Carolyn was definitely one of them. I have another mentor, Natasha, who's also an amazing woman that has kept me, knows me very well and kept me on the right track. When my wife, when I met my wife and we got married, she has a different perspective on life that kept me, again, very pointed. And I mean, my parents are part of my team. I talk to them daily, and we have a amazing relationship. And they also, the more I thought about what are my decisions, how did my decision impact them, which I didn't think earlier, which caused a lot of problems for us. And a lot of my financial ruin came from some of these decisions I made, which were, I didn't think through how the impact on other people around me. So, having kids changed me. So there's always, it's that thing of being selfless. When you start realizing and understanding how your decisions affect others, how they can help you make better quality decisions, whether through their advice, like in Carolyn's case, or have the impact on them, like my parents or my wife or my kids. All those things, they contribute to making better quality decisions. And ultimately, success comes from minimizing your downside risk, so minimizing your screw ups, and maximizing the return on those really good decisions you make. And it's only a couple of really big, key, great decisions that I think really transform life, and success. I heard this quote from Warren Buffett recently. He said, in 50 years of doing, investment, he goes, most of my decisions are like, eh. And he goes, it's only about a dozen that were truly remarkably good decisions. And if you think about it, there's, guys build one of the biggest fortunes on the planet, says it's only 12 decisions or so that got to him to that point. And I think this is where most people kind of misunderstand this process. I was one of those people. That's why I feel like I can relate, is that I thought, you knock it out of the park and that's how you really succeeded. But it's not. It's actually the very small decisions that actually stop you from like massive screw-ups that kind of, and then when you have the opportunity to strike on something that turns into a really big success, you pounce on that, and then you kind of, those are very far and few between, and they make that big leap for you. And that's how I feel like my success has come from, just slowly getting better with my decision making. And then when the real big ones come, you're also kind of, you have the foundation to take advantage and really, get the most out of those moments.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you get into your car and you start driving, you don't necessarily need to keep, moving your hands.
Yeah.
I thought driving was all about. It's just a matter of just slightly course correcting, you know what I mean? With the power steerings that we now have these days, like nothing will ever just, go on a straight plane. But your story, Igor, just involves multiple pivots and adaptations and reinventing and coming in and out of things and just looking at it from a whole different vantage point. Now, first of all, how do you identify when it's a time to change direction in business? Because so many people just hold on to a wall that no longer exists. It's just,
yeah. How do you stop flogging a dead horse? I know it's an age-old question in business. It's really hard, because if you're emotionally connected to it, you really sometimes it's really hard to give up on that. But a couple of things again. It's that decision making that I was talking about earlier. But from a business point of view, I think there's a really critical thought process, or like a process that helps achieve more than less, and that is what does the customer want, right? If you're listening, like what problem are you solving and what does the customer want? But what problem you're solving, I think is the most critical question, because there's a lot of people that start businesses with solutions looking for a problem. And then they get very wedded to their solution because it's their idea and they fall in love with the idea. And so they keep flogging that dead horse for a long time when there's actually no one interested, like customers. And so for me, it's being very aware of the problem you want to truly solve. And so as my career progressed in terms of business, what I realized is I got better at identifying what problem I'm solving and then hearing the customer and listening to the voice of the customer to optimize that solution that I'm, a problem. And that's what I think allowed me to get better and succeed more. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Now, maybe let's look at a specific example here. You did 24/7 golf as one of the products that you did, and I think you exited that one, right? But
that's right. Yes.
Maybe we can talk about what was that problem at that particular time, and how can that actually explain what you just mentioned there.
So, I got into the golf simulator space, and I had an indoor facility, which was doing okay, but we would get people coming asking us for, can I put this in my house? And being in Australia, it was very hard to get stuff from, because you have to basically bring it in from the US. And so I'm going to shorten that answer a little bit, but basically people in Australia didn't have access to the same stuff that people had in the US in terms of the golf simulators. So I started bringing that in and offering it here. And then I realized it was too expensive to bring it from the US. So I started manufacturing in China. And then when I started manufacturing, I realized I can deliver at a price that was extremely competitive in the market. And eventually I expanded to the US because I could go into the US with my manufacturing costs being so effective and basically undercut all my competitors and offer a B2B. So I would like white label my solution to other big companies that had access to the customers. And in the end, one of those companies that I was pitching to be like a white label partner ended up acquiring me. And so all of that really came, if you think about the chain of problems, I solved here in Australia, at a price point and a quality point, accessibility, solved those problems. Then when I moved to the US, I solved the problem of basically quality for a really cheap price. And then I was able to offer a solution that, to companies that didn't want or didn't have expertise in manufacturing and distribution. And I said, well, I can be your partner, so I solved that problem for them. They had the customers, they didn't have the rest of the value chain. And so I became that part of the value chain. And then even selling the business was really part of that whole equation where, they acquired my expertise and my patent and my manufacturing and distribution and expertise and my team and all of those things because they didn't have that internally. And so this gave them this, valuable part of the business. And since the acquisition, it's grown tremendously. And now it's, one of the key parts of the whole business and the strategy. And so that was kind of like if you think about like stepping stones for solving more and more problems, in the same kind of line. But, there's also, there's a great book. This is one of the good ones called The Trick to Money is Having Some. And he also does this lecture online. The guy, I forget his name now, the philosopher, he passed away about 10 years ago, but about 20 years ago, he did this lecture on this book where he talks about the trick to money, to making money is very simple. Find people with a problem, solve that problem. The more people that you find and the more that problem is worth it to them, the more money you'll make, because it's the most simple formula in the world. And most people forget that formula. And so as an example, Google solved the problem of sorting out all the information on the internet for billions of people. So they made billions of dollars. And, but at a small, like the people often ask me like, oh, well, can you do like really nice high-end custom golf simulators? I'm like, no, not my business. Because the people that have the problem to solve that is like this small, they're in the hundreds, maybe 1,000. Whereas people that, can afford my solution that I ended up selling is in the hundreds of thousands. Right. So when you solve a problem, it's not just about solving the problem. It's also how many people have that problem. Like if you're going to go and solve it for like one person or two people, that's not really a business. That's not scalable. And so that's the other part of the whole problem statement that is really important is when you're building a business, how many people have the problem that you want to solve? People often are like, I get pitched so many times now. Oh, what about this? Look at this is really good. I'm like, yeah, it's not a bad idea, but like, how many people actually saying, hey, this is a real problem? I'm prepared to fork out some money to have this problem solved, unless that number is in the has at least 100,000 people. Like, what's the point? You're gonna have a hobby, not a business.
Absolutely. I quite like that because, help enough people get what they want, then you too will get that which you want. So if you look at the billionaires, they're actually solving problems for billions of people, not just a select few of people that are just in your city and, bringing in a backpack full of water that could only, service 6 or so kids.
I mean, hey, I wish I stayed in the water business. That's been a really good business,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But obviously, coming from that, it does seem like innovation is at the core of the work that you're doing. How are you staying ahead of industry trends and continuing to innovate? I know you started off with the internet when it started, but now things are going faster. By the time we finish this call today, there's probably going to be 3 or 4 things we need to learn how to figure out.
There'll be new LLM models by the end of this call. Exactly. So, a couple of ways I do it now. So probably the number one way is I hire really, really smart people, way smarter than me, and I get out of their way. And the reason I bring that up is because people think you need to know everything. Right, you as the leader, whatever, and I don't agree with that. I believe I have 2 superpowers. We all have like superpowers and kryptonite, right? So this is like it's kind of what I think of mine, right? One is I think I'm good at figuring out what the customer wants, right? So Wayne Gretzky had this great quote. He what made him great was not seeing where the puck is, but where the puck is going to be, and that's kind of what I love doing. I love being able to see like there's all this AI stuff. Like, okay, this is great, but like, what are the real use cases? What problems can you solve with it? Not, hey, there's this solution. What problem can we find for this solution? Right? That never really works. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, in terms of superpowers, is building the right team, bringing the right people in, and the right people they want you to get out of the way, right? So there's some founders that like they can bring the right people, but then they kind of stand over them, looking over their shoulder, and kind of trying to micromanage. I'm the totally opposite. Like if you're going to bring me in when I can like knock some walls down for you, and so if you do that, I tend to rely on those people to help me understand what's happening with the latest technology or with the latest AI or with the latest this or that. And so it's really about I try to stick to what I'm good at, try to manage my weaknesses through having great people. But I also, you asked earlier, what does Carolyn, what does Natasha, what do those people do for you as all these people, your mentors, your team, your advisors, they allow you to be across so much more. They leverage your time, your knowledge, all those things. You can spread yourself so much wider when you have those, the right people around you. Versus trying to keep up with everything. Because like I love podcasts, right? I mean, hence why we're talking, right? But I love listening to podcasts. And if I listen to all the podcasts I actually wanted to listen to, I would get nothing done. Because there's just so much content out there. So how do you, there's only so much time in the day, right? So you have to leverage your time. You have to, rely on other people to lift up your skills and lift up your knowledge and all of that. And your job as a leader is to figure out what's really important and which kind of rabbit holes are really worth going and pursuing versus just being, chasing every shiny object. Do you know what I mean by that?
I like the conclusion to that, just chasing any shiny objects. I think it's a Russian statement that says if you chase 2 rabbits, you catch none. And from what you're saying, if you really want to, they say if you want to go far, you go alone. But if you want to go further, you go together. Now, Igor, obviously you've won some hearts with your story and your journey, because I viscerally believe that you represent the idea that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, you can come to a place and do and have a happier existence. Now, for those that might be considering maybe doing business with you or have been inspired by your journey or are sort of following a similar paths? Where can they go on the internet to find out some of the work that you have done, and how can they get a hold of you?
So look, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so please, follow me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I try to respond to as many as possible. My team helps me manage that as well. So they definitely, I get a bit of spam here and there, but they help me manage that. But the one thing we kind of didn't talk about, I alluded to, is the experiences I've had. I had this kind of idea and this mission to try to share those experiences very viscerally. And you used that word, I think, earlier in our chat, and I really love that word. It's like, for me, I want people to be able to experience what I experienced without having to go through the pain that I experienced. And so one of the things I recommend is, check out my board game, properly.game. I'm sure you'll put it in the notes of the show, but a lot of it's built on my experience. That game is built on my life experience, on the people that I know, their life, other entrepreneurs. And here's the really cool part. And I wish we actually touched upon it earlier, and I forgot to come back to it, but I wanted to say this. So the game has different cards. You pick up different cards. There's opportunities, there's, spend money, all that stuff, standard, right? And actually, Robert Kiyosaki's Cash Flow 101 was one of the key inspirations for me to do the game, right? So I want to give him credit as well, but one of my favorite cards you pick up in the game is a thing called Encounters that I created called Encounters. And that's when it's like you meet someone and they have an effect on your life, on your business. So there's a card in there, for example, there's a card, you meet a great mentor and they help you with this or that, right, as I've had. There's also a card in there, you meet someone who you think is going to be a great mentor and they ended up being a con man and they fleece you for 100 grand. That happened to me. And so all these experiences are in the game. And to me, I think we all need to treat life a little bit like a game, and entrepreneurship is a little bit like a game. And you just, you got to know the rules, you got to know the boundaries, and you also got to know how to leverage all those rules and boundaries to your advantage. And so that's one of the things I kind of wanted to share, is that there are ways to learn entrepreneurship, and I know you talk about it in your podcast about how do we share this experience with the world. Is yes, there's books, right? There's I love documentaries, by the way. I love all those Netflix business documentaries, But to me, what was missing, talk about a problem, right? What I saw in the market was like, there was nothing to kind of just really kind of get your reps in, like to test it. What are you going to be like in a certain situation? How are you going to react? How do the people around you going to react? And that's where the idea of a game came to me. And that's one of the things I wanted to share with the world. And again, it was on the shelf for 15 years and I had to redo it and reinvigorate it and redesign it and all that, which took about another year and a bit. But that's been my thing to share with the world, is how do you experience this entrepreneurial life, maybe, but without all the pain. You still get if you want to go down entrepreneurship, there's going to be pain, right? Got to be ready for that. But it's like, how do you kind of shortcut a little bit? How do you find a little hack, And anyway, that I just wanted to share that story and that thinking, because that, I think, a lot of your audience could relate to that.
Absolutely. I quite like that. And obviously, before we conclude, I heard that the Navy SEALs, I don't know which department of the Army, but let's just say they're the Navy SEALs. One of the first things that they train them is carrying a dead body and working with a jammed gun, because those are situations that will actually happen and they don't want them to panic and say, whoa, this wasn't in the training. So, and I think what your game presents is that simulation of, in case this happens in entrepreneurship, then you're not going to be a statistic that cannot go past it. Like a lot of businesses that we come across there. So I think that is quite needed.
Yeah, if you get hit in the head, in the face enough times, I'm talking about in entrepreneurship, not in military training, but if when you get, I call entrepreneurship like being punched in the face on a daily basis and getting up and doing it all over again. But at one point, your skin becomes thicker, you become so much more resilient. The question is, how do you get to that resilience? Mm-hmm. And you asked me before, like, how did I keep going? It's like over time, I just became so resilient to all these disasters that keep, happen, and they keep like happening. And like now I'm expecting, like, something's going to go wrong tomorrow. I have no doubt about it. But the difference is, and maybe this is probably the most as I say it, like this is really to me jumps out as probably the main lesson that what I'd love to embark on anyone listening to this. The main thing that keeps you going is when you build enough trust in yourself that you will deal with whatever comes your way. Because I think if you don't think you can deal with things, that's when you give up. But if you build that trust and you go, you know what, the world could end tomorrow, there could be a zombie apocalypse, I know that I can work it out. I trust myself. And I think that skill is one of the most critical, not just in business and entrepreneur, but in just in living a happy life and a fulfilled life.
Absolutely. When we were growing up, we were always told to look at what birds do. You see, a bird will perch itself on an old twig that's about to snap, and sometimes when the bird flies off, the twig actually breaks. But the bird is not worried about the strength of the twig because it knows it's got wings and it can fly off at any given moment. So it's super confident in its own capability, not in the strength of where it's standing. And so many people are always looking for a hard place to stand on so they can move the world, whereas you need to be confident in yourself in order to do and have a happier existence. I don't think I would have been able to articulate it as well as you have done, my man. But we keep talking about resilience and moving on and things of that nature. What's next? What can people expect, Igor?
Well, I've got a second book coming out soon, and with an introduction by a good friend of mine, Kevin Harrington, who's the first shark on the Shark Tank. I'm a huge fan of the Shark Tank, so we've got some collaboration work happening with that. And then I've got my app, which you mentioned, Golf Track, which is democratizing golf simulation for the masses, for the millions and millions of people that have iPhones already in their pocket. But after that, I don't know. I think. I'm really excited about sharing more messages with the world. That's kind of, I feel like now that I've kind of hit this, mid 40s, this kind of, I don't know, this stage of life where, there's this need to kind of share, the lessons with the world. But it's probably, comes from even having kids and, teaching them and seeing that growth in them is so rewarding that, you want to kind of elevate and leverage that, for a wider audience. But the thing I'm most excited about, probably, if you look at like the next decade, thinking about where the puck is going to be, I think the AI space, but specifically from a co-pilot, I think what I'm excited in seeing, and where I see maybe myself even getting into, is these use cases where AI becomes your co-pilot. It's not replacing you. I think a lot of people are afraid that AI is going to replace. I'm not sure that's a valid fear. Maybe in some cases, extreme cases, but to me, the opportunity is really, how does this thing that is becoming so smart become your enhancer? Where if you're a top performer, if you're a top, say, 5% of performers out there, whether you have a job, whether you have a business, whatever, right? Or a student even, right? If you're in the top 5%, where I see this AI it's going to lift you up so high that the gap between the top 5% and the rest is going to widen to crazy levels. And so my excitement comes from that growth. And I know I say it's only to the 5%, but everyone has access to it. Look at DeepSeek, look at the cost that's brought, it's come down at a cost that is crazy cheap, right? It's available to everyone. And so for me, it's that democratization of that co-pilot AI thing is like almost science fiction like, and I get excited about that. So I'm hoping that sometime in the future I can kind of get into that space. But I think my dream one day is really to get into to run a venture fund and incubate new startups. I call myself a startup addict. I love starting from zero, blank page to that's where my happiness lies.
Absolutely. Now, Igor, I can't thank you enough for all the insights and you sharing your incredible journey with us today. But, you did mention something about AI. I just liken AI to the modern day car. All right.
Yeah.
Some people have it. They can drive it to work and everything else. Some people use it on the weekend. Some people use it to make money as an Uber. Some people use it to race other cars. So it's just going to be how are you equipped to be able to use that particular piece of technology. And I think you just committed the ultimate sin. I just had to look in my notes. You mentioned you've got a book coming, but you didn't mention you were going to come and help and launch it on the Online Prosperity Show. And I don't think we can just let you off off the hook like that. So I think you have to correct that. What's going to happen with the book?
Absolutely. So look, I mean, it's just going to be on Amazon soon. My first book is called Practical Manifestation, which is kind of a project manager's guide to manifesting anything you want in life. My new book is called Agile Manifestation, which is, using agile principles. I'm a huge tech geek, like I said, and, I use agile in my companies, but also like all the best companies in the world use agile. And kind of, again, talking about identifying a problem, like you go to work, all these millions of people go to work, they use agile principles to build the most amazing things, like rockets that land themselves, or software that does all this AI stuff. Like, but what I don't see is people using that in their personal life, right? They put a vision board on their wall and they do mantras and hope things come true. And I'm like, that's not how things work. Yes, you got to have belief, but you also need to put in the work. And so that's another thing that I identified as a gap that I wanted to share, is like, there's, to achieve all these things, we already do this in the corporate world. I don't know why more people don't do it in their personal life. And so that's the message I'm sharing.
Wow, I think I know why people don't do it in their personal life, Igor. It's because when they go to work, they're wearing a tie and a suit, and then when they come back home, they remove that uniform and that identity, which helps them want to separate their work and life. But I think we're blurring those lines now. So it's one of those things. That was just my opinion. But
this is my work attire, by the way. This is my suit and tie. I love this. This is my golf tops.
Same. Yeah, we're both working. But I really appreciate your time, man. I mean, your story is just a testament to the power of resilience, innovation, and just the entrepreneurial spirit. And I really appreciate you for the journey that you took, and also for the time that you spend with us on the call today.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a fun conversation. Really appreciate you.
Absolutely. And for those that are listening, thank you so much. I know it's one of the longest ones we've done, but if you found value in today's episode, please just share it with somebody who could benefit from Igor's insights. There's so many of us that are looking to start, scale, and maybe grow a business, and they don't quite know where to start or what it is that they do, or just that motivation to know that somebody else has done it. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to the Online Prosperity Show, where more inspiring and informative content is abundant, like Igor saw in the first shop he came across in Australia. I want you to join us next time as we explore ideas to help you lead a happier and more prosperous life. Until next time, keep striving for success and embracing your journey. Bye for now.